Welcome to our location on the sunny Isle of Wight. This is Brading Downs on a beautiful blue sky day, and I've actually used the view from here in one of the shots. This view over here is the one I ended up using, which is really nice. So a bit of a bonus for the location. So let's get into some basic VFX stuff. This is basic kind of VFX 101, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through the best way to just kind of match the stills to CG environments using the simplest process possible. And with this basic approach, the most important thing is to get the camera information, know what the camera's up to, so that we can get a match. So if, like me, when you're in a busy environment or on set, you always have trouble remembering things sometimes, especially in heavy duty full-on environments, then make yourself a little list of things you need to go through, a checklist. So I've got one kind of here. I've just laminated it, and it basically lets me, remember things. So I just go through the checklist and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. So before we do that, let's just go through some real basic VFX kit. Now, first thing is, if you want to set your camera up, you need to know a few things. You need to know, well, here's the checklist, so let's have a look at it. So, GPS location. Now, the reason for that is that if you're outdoors, GPS is very useful. If you don't have time to take a high dynamic range light probe on location, which sometimes happens, then one of the best ways to get a lighting match is to use a physical daylight system in your computer graphics package, which is what we're using this time. So GPS is very useful for that. Time and date, of course, because with a GPS only gives you the location, but to set the sun in the sky you need time and date. Then, of course, we need to know our camera height, our tilt, roll, or sometimes referred to in the industry as camera Dutch. We need to know the heading to north, i.e. where the camera's relationship is to magnetic north. And then a reference to our subject, often called distance to subject, so we know how far our subject is from the camera, so we've got some kind of real world measurement to go with. And then you may also, depending on your requirements, want to take a grey reference or a color chart just to make sure that you've got everything you need. And last but not least, make sure that the white balance on your camera is set properly, because if you're using stills like Camera Raw, which is what we're using today, you don't really have too much of a problem because the white balance can be handled in post-production as metadata. But if your camera only lets you save JPEGs, or you're shooting movies with a DSLR where the color space is basically baked into the movie, then if you don't set your white balance properly and you've left it on tungsten from the day before or something, then you'll get a horrible looking scene, especially if you're outdoors like this. So, nice little checklist. So let's have a look at some of the things I brought with me. I've got a little kit which I bring with me everywhere. I've got a bigger one, with more stuff in. But basically, there's a number of ways to take measurements, but the cheapest option is just go to your DIY store and buy a $9.99 30-meter fiberglass tape measure. Cheap and cheerful. Spirit level. Now this is useful for just kind of getting your camera level. So I tend to put this on a tripod and level the tripod up. Heading to north, cheap compass. So this will get our heading for the camera. And if you want a sort of known real world measurement in your shot, sometimes you don't need them. These are handy. This is a cheap £1 sort of fold out tape measure. It's 2 meters, and what you can do is you can turn that into a 1 meter by 1 meter 90 degree and throw it on the ground and get yourself a nice real world reference that will be in the shot. £2.5 shackle. Might sound a bit strange to carry one of these around with you, but some tripods are very light. One of my tripods here is a carbon fiber tripod. Doesn't have a huge amount of weight to it, and if it's a windy day, the last thing you really want to do is have your favorite camera go over on you while you're kind of doing what I'm doing right now, which is talking to it. So if it's a windy day, very handy to have some extra weight on hand. And here's probably one of the more expensive bits, although I've got a few others. This is a color chart. It's currently covered in plastic just to protect it. So this is a color checker chart. It's very useful to put this in front of camera because it will then give you an actual realistic color reference of the environment you're in. So it has all the correct colors on it. There's a grayscale down the bottom, but more importantly, it also has skin tones on it. And this is basically what you can use in post to check accurately the color that you require or you may want to know of in your setup. So always handy to have one of those if you can. Right, so having gone through that little list of things, let's look at one other thing. Now obviously if you work in VFX a lot, you might end up with one of these. They're obviously a bit expensive, so not everybody's going to have one. They're used in the survey industry. This is like a disto. This is the D8 model, which is nice because it's got a camera on it, so in broad daylight like this when you can't see the laser, because this is a laser rangefinder, it measures things. You can actually use the camera and zoom in on your target and press the button, and it will give you a reading. So for speed, and especially when you're on your own, like I am today, this is great for getting your camera height, your distance to subject. This particular model also has a thing in it called an inclinometer, which means that it will tell me the angle it's at, which means I can also get the tilt of the camera and things like that. So very handy all-in-one unit, but obviously somewhat expensive. If you don't have the luxury of something like this because you don't work in the industry professionally all the time, as I said, you can actually buy cheap inclinometers. This is a spirit level. It's got a rubbish inclinometer in it. But, you know, for like £5, you can buy a really decent manual inclinometer from, you know, sort of places like Maplin, stuff like that. And that will let you do your tilt. So with that little group of stuff all set up, I think we're ready to start going through the checklist and actually doing stuff. So let's do that. So I'm just going to grab out and do a GPS. So if you remember on the card, I'm just going to get the card out. And first on the list is GPS, which is our GPS location. So let's fire up my phone and find the software for that. Now this is an Android phone, so what I would say is you can get all of these kind of things on iPhones or whatever. So keep that in mind. They're very useful. So what I've got in here is a little app for Android called GeoCam. And what GeoCam does is, with the GPS and the phone turned on, it lets you take a photograph and it burns in the GPS coordinates. Now this particular phone I got is a cheapie. It's an HTC, so it doesn't have a compass in it, sadly. Otherwise I wouldn't need the manual compass. But as I say, not everybody carries around smartphones. So I've got a little camera picture here now with a head-up display on it and GraphiQL. And in particular at the top, I've got my GPS location. So I'm going to step over to my shooting camera, and I'm just going to stand next to it and point at my location. And I'm going to take a photograph. There we go. So the photograph's been taken, and on screen now it's kind of showing me all the information. Do I want to save the picture, which I do. So I'm just going to say OK to that. And that's going to save to the SD card in my phone. And when I get back to base, I can extract that picture. And I've now got the GPS location of where I am, and I didn't have to write anything down, which is quite nice. So quick, very quick if you're on set. So let's get rid of that. So, okay, so next up on the list, what have we got? Here we go. Time and date. Now, if you have an assistant with you, you'll often have a thing called a camera sheet on set. And the camera sheet will have all this information on it, and your assistant will just write this stuff out at the time that the camera turns over to do the shot. If we are doing stills, what's really handy is most modern cameras do what's called metadata. And basically when they take a photograph, they burn in details like the camera information, lens, date, time. And you know, same happens with movies when you shoot on DSLRs. So we can get time and date for free when we take the photograph, because when I take this is a still, I'm going to be using camera raw, and each of those photographs is going to be time stamped. So remember to set the time correctly on your camera, otherwise it's a bit pointless. I once forgot to set for summertime in the UK, so my camera was an hour out. So I had to go through Lightroom and change the metadata for the actual time of day by an hour. So remember that one, make sure your camera's date and time is set properly. So the camera's going to do this for me. The next two, date and time, are going to be done by the camera when I take the photograph. Next up is height, tilt, and roll. So this is information that I actually physically need to take. So and again, I'm going to use a spreadsheet in my phone to take this data down. So let's get the old disto out, and I'm going to go over, turn it on, and basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold this to get the camera height at the approximate center of the lens. So the center of the lens is about here. So and basically point the disto at the ground. Now obviously I could do this as a tape measure, and it says 0.95 of a meter because I like metric. And you don't have to, of course, you can set it to imperial if you wish. And then I can basically just enter this information into the phone, into my little spreadsheet, and I've got the camera height. So next up, tilt is one of the most important measurements you need to take. There are a number of things in CG that kind of gives away bad perspective. Two of the key ones are not having the right focal length lens match, and the other one is having your tilt off. I'm going to use my Disto D8 again, as I mentioned earlier. It has an inclinometer built into it, which can tell the degrees of angle it's at. If it's pointing down, it'll be a negative number. If it's pointing up, it'll be a positive number. So I'm just going to hold this up against my camera. Now, if I was on set, professional shoot, the camera might have rails. Basically, you're looking for a straight, flat part on the camera or tripod that will give you the chance to put something your inclinometer against to get the reading. So I'm going to use the underside of the camera body, just down here, and hold the disto against it. And when I look down at the screen, I can see it's roughly around, it's hovering around 10.9, 11.2, but that's because it's a live thing and I'm holding it. So we're going to round up. We don't need to be absolutely perfect. So 11 degrees is good, 11 degrees up, or plus 11 degrees. So plus 11 degrees is what's going to go into the spreadsheet. So let's put that in before we forget. Right, and that's our degrees up. So now we know our tilt. Let's go and do the next thing on the checklist. Now, roll, I happen to know for a fact I don't need. You might say, why don't I need roll? That's because I've leveled the camera. It's often referred to as level camera. And what I've done here is this is a nice flat tripod head. I've put a spirit level on it, and I've made sure the camera is dead level. So there is no roll, it's at 0. So I know that, so I can put that in, so I don't have to worry about roll. Lens focal length is a really important parameter. Now, having said that, I'm actually not going to bother to write it down. You may go, why? Well, just like date and time, I know with this camera, when it's in stills mode, it's actually going to bake the focal length into the picture. So whether it's a JPEG or a camera raw file, the metadata or the EXIF data is going to have the focal length. So that's good. However, having said all that, if you're on a shoot or if you borrowed a friend's camera, you're not familiar with it, then take the data manually, because you can never guarantee that you're going to get it for free. A good example is that I was on a Red Epic shoot a while back, and the camera department assured me that all the metadata was being recorded. I'd get everything, including focal length. But sure enough, when I checked the next day's rushes and looked at it in Red Cine, surprise, surprise, there was no metadata. So I didn't know the focal length of the lens. Fortunately, I'd instructed my assistant just to take the data anyway. That's what we're there for. So we had it, but it just goes to show that even with professional crews, you cannot rely on somebody else telling you what you're going to get. You're responsible for your department. You need to take that information. So if you're not sure, especially for shooting one of these cameras in movie mode, where you will not get the focal length, then physically write it down and take that information, because you're going to need it. This camera is currently set to 18mm for this particular shot. As I said, I'm not going to make a note of it because I know that I'm shooting stills today. So with the JPEG and the RAW file, I'm actually going to get that EXIF data with the focal length baked in. And when we get back to base, we're going to be good to go. The other thing we will discuss in post a bit more about is gates, film gate. Obviously, a focal length of a lens is no good without knowing your gate size or the sensor size, so we'll go into that in more detail. But for now, we're ready to go and we're sorted. We have heading. This is our compass heading. So I want to know the relationship of the camera to north, so I know exactly where the sun is. So I've got the compass out. Compass has a sighting mark on it, which is the direction you pointed in. The actual compass needle is pointing north, which is over there. So basically, if I rotate the disc here until the north lines up with the compass needle, then the heading here, I can read off the actual dial, and the heading is 290 degrees from north, so not quite 360 all the way around. So that's our heading information. So again, let's make sure we got that in our phone. Right, okay, so that's in there now. So next up is distance to subject. I'm going to be standing on this table, so what I need is something to measure to. All I'm going to do is basically just move this stuff off here, and I'll stick this box up. I'll use that to fire the disto against. Here we go. So again, I'm going to take a measurement. This is called distance to subject. And if you look on your camera, you should be able to find out where the sensor is. There's a little mark here on the top of my DSLR, which basically tells me where the sensor is. And I'm going to turn the disto on and fire it at the case. Now, I can just about see the red laser, so I don't need to worry about the camera. And it measures from the rear of the disto, or you can set it to the front. And press to take a measurement, and that's 2.95 meters, which I shall put in here. And that gets us the distance subject, which is handy to know because I'm going to stand on the table. I know how tall I am. If I know how far away I am from the camera, that gives me kind of a real-world measurement that I can work with. Okay. Well, we're nearly done, but we've forgotten something. Do you know what that is? Have you spotted it? No? Well, you may remember earlier on we took the camera height, which is a very important measurement. But it's not 100% useful to us on this shoot because I'm not actually going to be standing on the grass, which is the height from we took. I'm actually going to be standing on this table. So what I actually need to know is the relationship between the top of this table and the camera. So that means you need to take an additional measurement. Now, on a professional shoot, on a big set, with lots of props and set pieces, you might, this is basically referred to as set survey data. And you'll probably take a lot of measurements because sometimes you really need to know the physical size of something that's on your set. This is a simple shoot. So I just need to know the height of this table. Because if I know the height of this table, the height of my camera, the difference is the actual height of my feet in relation to the camera position. So let's fire the disto up. It's got a little feature to flip out, which lets me hang it on stuff. And I'm going to hang it on the table and take the measurement. And we have 1 meter. So that's going to go into the spreadsheet, 1 meter. That'll be the last measurement we need. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of information to this because 1 meter is not a lot of use. It's 1 meter, which is the table height to the ground. So I'm going to make a note of that, table height, because without that, obviously, I don't know what the measurement's for. I've already got the camera measurement, and that's the height of the camera from the ground. And that's it. That's the last bit of information we need. And we can now move on. Let's take a look at the list again. white balance. Now, I mentioned this earlier, it's always good to set your white balance. Now, I'm not going to set a custom white balance. I could do that with a grey card or a white card. But this is a Canon 650D. Canon's presets are very good. I know that if I set it to sunny day, so this is a sunny day preset and I've got set on here because it's a really nice, beautiful sunshine day, then when I shoot, I'm going to get a really nice balanced image. So check your white balance, make sure it's set, and we're kind of good for the shoot. Okay, so now we need to just do the color chart before we take the shot. Here's the color chart out of its wrapping, and I'm just going to use my remote, point to my camera here, and get it to take the shots. There we go. Stick that away. And now we're going to do the actual shoot. So now I'm going to stand up on the table and take the actual shot. Now set the camera with the timer on it. So here we go. And that should do it. Okay, now we're done. So basically, we've taken the first shot. We've done all our setups. The second shot is much simpler. I just need a blue sky behind me with the up angle. Now, I set that shot up before in CG and did the previs, as you saw. So for that shot, I won't go through this whole procedure again because you've just seen it. But the camera was at 26 degrees up, so that's the magic number. I need to make sure that I'm looking roughly in the right direction for the kind of sun falling on me in relation to the shooting angle that I want. And I'll just basically position the camera 26 degrees up, frame myself. What's nice about this particular SLR is it's got a swivel screen in it, so I can see myself, so I can kind of frame myself up nicely. And then I can take the shot and know that that was going to match the CG. So again, make sure you've got the heading information, all that stuff that we just went through. So if obviously you haven't changed your GPS location, you only need to take it once. But anything else that's changed, like the tilt, the angle to north, if you've moved the camera around, the height, because you've changed the tripod height to get this new shot, anything that's changed, you need to kind of take a note of that. The nice thing about taking stills, as I said earlier, is you get the metadata. So I haven't bothered to take the focal length of the lens because I know that that will be in the metadata. However, if your system doesn't capture lens information, especially like if you're shooting in movie mode on a DSLR, it will not tell you what the focal length was. Then that's really important that you take a note of what the focal length of your lens is, because that will affect the shot as you put it into the CG environment. So there we go. Hope that mostly makes sense, and we'll get back to base and start working on this stuff.